Thank you so much for joining us. We're on a tight clock today. So I'm going to ask everybody, as a courtesy to our guest speaker, Robert Hogan from Representative Espaillat's office, to please put into the chat your state, your congregation if you want. Give him a sense of who's in the room with him. But we're going to sort of jump right in. I will remind folks to please mind your mics. We don't want to talk over Robert while he is speaking. I'm also going to remind you that if you, if your camera's on, to remember that it's on and we're all seeing what you're doing. Again, please put into the chat your name, your congregation if you want to, certainly the state that you're from. Maybe one thing that gives you hope for the climate. That would be nice to hear. My name is Pablo de Jesus. I'm the Executive Director of the Unitarian Universalists for Social Justice. As part of our work on environment and climate justice, and in honor and deference to the many UUs that were involved with the initial drafting of the Earth Bill as part of the Earth Bill Network, we are deeply pleased to have Robert Hogan, the current shepherd for the bill in Representative Espaillat's office, speak with us this evening. He's going to give us a nice state of play on the bill, talk a little bit about some of the Senate side conversation that's emerging, and remind us of why it's an important piece of legislation. And tell us how, as UUs, we can be involved in advancing this piece of visionary and bold legislation.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much, Pablo. I appreciate the introduction. Everyone, my name's Robert. I am the Senior Policy Counsel for Congressman Adriano Espaillat, New York's 13th District, which is Harlem and the Bronx. I have been with our team for about 18 months now, and I am the primary staffer that covers environmental issues and climate justice for the member. Our big climate bill, both this Congress, last Congress, and hopefully next Congress as well, has been the Earth Act. And, we really can't do any of the things that we need to do to advance this bill without the activist communities that are behind us supporting it. So to everyone in the audience, let me just first say before I launch my presentation, to all the people who, are part of the Earth Bill Network or who are part of UUSJ and who are, making the effort to reach out to their congressional offices, meet in person, meet via Zoom to really advocate for this bill. We are so incredibly grateful. The congressman is grateful. And for those of you who are less familiar with the bill but are thinking about becoming more active, it's my hope that today's session can kind of, convince you of the urgent need for this legislation and why it is so important. So with that, I will make a couple of quick just opening remarks, and then I'll launch into a slide presentation. And then after that, we can do Q&A. I do have a hard cutoff, unfortunately, at 7:45. But, with that, hopefully that gives us enough time. With that, yeah, I'll launch into my opening remarks. The Earth Act at its core, it's a call to action to save our future. I think a lot of people here are well aware that scientists say that once the Earth reaches 2.7 degrees of Fahrenheit of global heating, we reach the point of no return, and global warming becomes permanent, and it will destabilize the entire planet. According to the UN, the Earth has already experienced 2.0 degrees of global heating. That is a major concern. And so the impetus behind this bill was my boss said, okay, well, we have the Green New Deal, which is only a, non-binding resolution calling on Congress to act to curb climate change in addition to provide social programs. But we don't have any actual legislation that enforces it. And the Inflation Reduction Act, while it was a step in the right direction, it's still, not a bill that has any sort of emission mandates. It only gives you really, some tax handouts. Some of the handouts it gives are for big oil. My boss takes the view that it's not enough. And according to climate experts that we work with to develop this bill, at a place called Regenerative Intelligence. There's only one bill right now in circulation in the 118th Congress that has the absolute 100% scientific certainty to meet the UN emission goals set out in the Paris Climate Accords, and that is our bill, the Earth Act, to stop climate pollution. So with that, I will launch into my PowerPoint, and I'm going to share my screen if that's okay. Just give me one moment. Okay. All right. So you should all be looking at my PowerPoint window now, and I'm going to just do present. Okay. So this is our PowerPoint that we made just to try to put everything in a more digestible format. I'll also send this around, or I'll have Pablo send this around to everyone after the meeting in case there's anything anyone missed wants to revisit. But yeah, the official name of our bill is the Earth Act to Stop Climate Pollution by 2030. It's HR 598. You can read the text right now on congress.gov. We initially introduced it as our last bill of the 117th Congress in December 2022. And then to show how important of a bill it was the first bill that we reintroduced at the start of the 118th Congress in January. So with that, we have a current co-sponsor list that is, a dozen deep or so. We have a lot of New York members. We have a lot of California members, some Illinois members, Jasmine Crockett and Sheila Jackson Lee, Texas members, and Lloyd Doggett too. What I will say is that every single one of these members was won over by the work of activists that met with our office after they met with us. And we don't have these members of Congress on the bill without our Earth Bill Network team in Arizona, in Illinois, in New York, doing the hard on the ground work, meeting with their congressmen, reaching out to indicate their support. Pretty much 90% of these co-sponsors were won because of grassroots supporters of the bill like yourselves. So there really is a chance for an impact to be made. We obviously know that this co-sponsor list is, not as long as we're hoping it to be, but hope springs eternal, because with a bill as necessary as this, people are always going to have their office doors open and be willing to listen. So we also have a very strong list of group endorsements. I know I've just recently added Unitarian Universalists to this list. We recently got Earth Justice, which is one of the quote unquote big greens. We are going after groups like the Sierra Club and the NRDC as well, in hopes that they will lend their weight behind the bill. And as you can see, this is only a drop in the bucket of all of the 500 total citizen leaders and 100 organizations that have endorsed the bill. So, we already have a really good coalition. And now it's just a matter of educating members of Congress on what the bill does, the importance of the bill, and that's where you all come in. So the slideshow is intended to kind of just give a baseline on what the contents of the bill are, and then, I'm happy to answer questions and go into detail after that. One thing I will say is that because the bill is, fairly ambitious and was written with 2030 emissions reductions timelines back in 2022, the messaging that we've got is that if we want a Senate co-sponsor for the bill, or a Senate lead for the bill rather, that we will likely have to push back the emissions timelines to 2035, or at least somewhere in between 2030 and 2035 for it to have a real shot of passing the Senate, even if we keep the House, keep the presidency, and keep the Senate. So with that, we still have our 2030 timeline in the House bill, but the longer that this takes to be ushered and passed through Congress, we think we have to get more realistic. So we're actively exploring different changes to the bill, and definitely open to any commentary and feedback that you guys may have after the presentation, and I'll give you my email as well. But with that, we'll launch into it. So I mentioned before, there's a consensus tipping point for global heating of 2.7 degrees that we need to hit. The UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has said that the best way to do this is to tackle the greenhouse gas emission industries. We are not currently subject, or at least in the US, to any sort of greenhouse gas emissions reduction timeline. beyond what the EPA is really doing with vehicles. And but ultimately, we need a law that enacts hard and fast mandates to get us down to 0% greenhouse gas emissions in, the key polluting sectors. So, as I mentioned, our bill is the only bill in Congress, according to experts, that has the certainty to meet the Paris climate emissions goals, the goals of the Green New Deal, and to bring us down to a place where the US will not be contributing to and can potentially meet the point of no return for global warming, so that we don't give our children a future that is, subject to climate change. It is still possible. And that is kind of the view that the bill takes, because, if not now, then it'll be too late a decade from now. So overall, the bill tries to do these 0% emission mandates while also providing generous subsidies for good paying union jobs in renewable energy sectors, as well as subsidies for the sectors that are being targeted to make these transitions. So, effectively, if we're mandating that you're a sector like, say, the energy sector or the cars sector that has to get down to 0% emissions by 2030 or by 2035, the government will give you a 50% stipend in order to effectuate that. If you're not doing it, then there are measures that cut off that funding. But I'll get into more of the weeds if we get questions about that. I want to keep powering through because I know we have limited time. So I keep mentioning the different sectors that we're trying to cut to 0% emissions via the emissions mandates in this bill. There are really three sectors in the current version of the bill. The first is the electricity sector. The second is vehicle emissions, trucks, cars, and buses, and then there's also agriculture. So the goal of the bill for the first two sectors is to reach 100% renewable electricity production in the US by 2030. The second goal is to reach 100% zero emission vehicles by 2030, sort of accelerate the EPA timelines and make them faster and quicker with generous subsidies. And then lastly, a portion of, I'm sure at least some of you know this, but something that was new to our office when climate groups came to us is that the agriculture sector of our economy is actually a major contributor to global carbon emissions levels, and also is something that's in need of reform. So the last portion of this bill is the agriculture sector, which tries to mandate increased climate smart farming practices to reduce emissions on farms as well. And like I said, the Earth Act would also create extremely generous federal grant programs to cover up to 50% of all the costs associating with shifting to these 0% emissions targets, while also funding new jobs in renewable energy sectors. So I will now go into a bit more about the cars, vehicle production, and climate smart farming practices. So like I mentioned, there's countless studies that show that these three sectors are effectively the tipping point sectors. If we change these three industries to make their emissions, negligible or zero, then it's still possible for us to win the war against global heating. The Earth Act, like I mentioned, has that 2030 timeline. It expressly provides that utility companies must transition to 100% clean and healthy inputs by 2030. Those inputs that are included are solar, wind, geothermal, tidal water power, not fossil fuels. I will note that I know that we've gotten a bunch of questions as to whether or not nuclear power is included. As of right now, the current version of the bill does not expressly state it and would leave it up to the implementing organizations, both in the White House and at the EPA, the Department of Commerce, Department of Agriculture, and I think the activist community is really split over this, and I'm happy to go into more detail over which way we may ultimately decide in our question section, but I don't want to let that derail our conversation. I do just want to say, I know the activist community is split over nuclear energy. So if you have any, strong feelings that you want the congressman to be made aware of when he's making this decision as to whether or not to permit nuclear energy for the Senate version of the bill, definitely reach out to our office, and we can do our best to get you an audience with the congressman, or at least if not, I will relay the message. So second portion of the bill is cars. The bill requires car manufacturers to make exclusively electric vehicles by 2030. Truck manufacturers are also included. And the reason being here is that the transportation sector generates more greenhouse gases annually than any other sector. I think that's something that a lot of climate activists are well aware of. And, the US is simply not at a place where we can get to, using trains as a primary means of transport. Cars are probably going to be around because of the way the US highway system was designed for the rest of our lifetimes. So, the most important thing we can do is make sure that they are electric, since we have the ability, we have the technology. It's just a matter of mandates and subsidies to get us there. The third section of the bill, right now we have it designed, the agriculture section, so that it wouldn't affect small farmers. Instead, it would require publicly traded farming and livestock corporations to increase the number of regenerative agriculture practices they're using by 2030. This isn't as clear cut as the 0% emissions mandates for vehicles and electricity generation. That's because, agriculture is inherently different based on which crops you grow. There's a lot of kicking to the Department of Agriculture to figure out which types of farms that are publicly traded will be subject to this, what the timeline for increasing regenerative agriculture practices will look like, and what specific practices they want to focus on. But the bill does provide a number of definitions for the agriculture practices that we would like to see increased. In general, for those not familiar with regenerative agriculture, these are agriculture practices that build soil health, and in doing so, they capture atmospheric carbon and put it back into the earth. And in a way, they work as a natural, preventative measure against excess carbon pollution. Plant a tree whenever you get the chance. But plants and soil, and this is something I learned after joining the office, they absorb 30% of all carbon that's emitted by humans. That is a huge percentage. And, healthy soil is necessary, though, to do this carbon capture. So even a small increase in soil health goes a long way towards cutting down atmospheric carbon. Just some examples of regenerative agriculture practices that are called for in the Earth Act. No-till farming. It's a way of ensuring that soil is minimally disturbed. Cover crops, planting of crops that don't yield food but actively enrich the soil. Reason being that, unhealthy soil isn't going to assist with carbon emissions. So, we need that soil both to produce food and to, help the planet. Livestock farming is also a component of this bill, contributes to about half of all farming related greenhouse gas emissions, which is why it's such an important thing that we included in the bill. Livestock emits methane gas. Feeding livestock dry matter increases methane emissions. So, the bill attempts to require livestock diets to be reduced to at least 30% dry matter or less, also by the year 2030. Those are just a couple of the technical examples of the agriculture portion of the bill. One thing I will note is that of the different components of the bill that we're thinking about reworking for the Senate, in addition to potentially pushing the timelines back to 2035, we're also thinking about enacting clearer agriculture mandates so that these farmers know exactly, what degree of climate smart farming and what regenerative agriculture practices they have to use by our timelines, instead of what the bill does right now, kind of kicking it to the experts at the Department of Agriculture. We think there's a happy medium, and those comments and red lines are being provided to us, I believe, by groups like the Sierra Club, the NRDC. We're working with We Act for Environmental Justice as well. And, kind of hoping to get one of or more of those big agriculture groups on board with the changes without making too many drastic changes to the bill that might lose our existing sponsor support. So it's a delicate balancing act, but I'm confident we'll strike it because it is our #1 priority. This last slide's getting cut off a bit, but the thing is, all of the stuff that I just mentioned is not going to be taken well by existing and entrenched industry. We want to make sure that it supports jobs and, lifts the US up while, providing a better planet for our children, our children's children. But, this is going to require the fight of our lives. Just because the legislation is there, it's a whole nother thing to try to get it past the Congress where, no Republicans are even contemplating things like climate smart farting or climate smart farming rather, or emissions reductions. That's where you come in. Every single person, as I mentioned, that's signed on as a co-sponsor to the Earth Act, signed on because their own constituents, as part of the Earth Bill Network, as part of UUSJ or any other advocacy organization that we have in the groundwork for us, went to their office and explained to them why it was so important. Our on the ground activists have been the lifeblood that have been driving this bill. And if, the long-term picture for this bill, ideally, would be we keep the presidency Democratic in 2024, beginning in the 119th Congress in 2025. We have a fully Democratic House and a Democratic majority controlled Senate gets kept. Without that, I don't think that any meaningful climate action gets done. So, we're really hoping that the elections turn out the way we want. But, even then, this bill in the 119th Congress, even if Democrats control all three of the branches, is not going to get passed in the Senate without at least a few Republicans supporting it. And, for those that are heavily influenced by entrenched polluters and corporate money, the most important thing that they can do is be visited by constituents who care about the climate crisis. I've seen, at least on the House side, hearts and minds be changed. It can be done, even with, some of the Republicans that we're working with. It's just a matter of, keep doing the grinding, keep putting in the work, because it's something that, we all owe to our children. And as idealistic as it may sound, it's becoming something that I think more and more Republican voters, at least, are starting to see a clearer picture on, that we need additional action on climate beyond the Inflation Reduction Act. So it's just a matter of them hearing from those voters, the ones that directly elect them, that legislation like the Earth Act is important. And once we get the first Republican, I think there's going to be, a bunch of rest of them that will jump. So for those of you who are wondering how you can get involved in the bill, you can visit our advocacy website, earthbill.org. You can also read the text on congress.gov, and you can also email me. And I think that I get cut off here, but I will drop my email address in the chat as well. It is robert.hogan@mail.house.gov. If you'd like to be connected with groups that are already visiting Congress, or, create your own, we have resources that we can provide on that. If, you'd like to solicit a meeting with me or the congressman to discuss the legislation, ask questions about it and things, and, make remarks on things that you would like to see in the Senate version of the bill, we're open to this. And really, we want this to be a collaborative process, because I've said this once and I've said it again because it's just so important to drive it home. We are nothing without our on-the-ground activists who care. They are the people every day in all 50 states that are making a real difference and our only chance at solving the climate crisis. So, if there's anything in this presentation that you saw that motivated you to get involved, I encourage you to do so and give any time you can, because this climate crisis is the biggest problem of our lifetimes, and if we don't solve it, there might not be a habitable Earth for future generations, and it makes all of the other problems seem a bit smaller. So, not to scare you, but I will end my PowerPoint presentation there. I'm going to open the floor up for questions. As I mentioned, I will also drop my email address in the chat in case we get cut off. But I can go till about 7:45, and then after that, I will have Pablo disseminate the slides to everyone, and my email address, robert.hogan@mail.house.gov, for all who have follow-up questions or want to meet with their office. So with that, Pablo, I'll hand it back over to you and do my best to answer any questions that audience members have.
Great. Thank you so much, Robert. And just to kick it off, I'll ask it as a question. Sometimes when I'm talking about the Earth Bill, I hear folks say, well, why is Representative Espaillat the sponsor of this bill? And I like to remind people, there was a little thing called Superstorm Sandy that reminded all New Yorkers that climate change is indeed something that people in the Northeast have to think about. So, but there was a question in the chat that came a little earlier about, well, if this bill is modeled in part off of the Green New Deal, any sense of why the squad haven't joined as sponsors?
Yeah, I mean, it's a political concern. If I can be frank, I don't want to throw the squad under the bus. They are some of our most important allies on these issues. The Green New Deal at its core is just a resolution that calls on Congress to act in a certain way to meet the Paris Climate Accords, in addition to calling for a bunch of other economic and social actions. It doesn't have any force of law or any clear path to get us there, and it's non-binding. I think that the intention behind the Green New Deal was for Representative Ocasio-Cortez to design a sweeping climate bill. And I think that for one reason or another, that didn't happen before we released the Earth Act. And so even though our bill was, a binding proposed law and hers was just a resolution, there was some tension there because she felt that she should have taken ownership. It's just one of those things. We still work, day in, day out on other issues with her office and love them dearly. I think it's just a matter of, we had activists that went to her office. We heard those concerns. I don't think that we've gotten a meeting since, and, it's been a couple years, but I absolutely think that now is a better time than ever to get the squad on board. I don't think that it goes against anything that they fundamentally believe. I think, aside from political considerations, they would all be on it already. I know that I'll certainly vote for it if it came to the floor, but politics can be fickle. And so if one representative feels that another is stepping on another's toes, then, it's a matter of just doing the hard work, winning hearts and minds to get them on board and to get them to set egos aside.
Thank you for that informative and candid answer, Robert. Far more candid than I was expecting. And I appreciate that. I want to say to folks, I'm going to encourage you to be brave and raise your hand, your electronic hand with the reaction button, and ask your question if you have them. I know that at least a couple of you have wondered aloud with me about the nuclear issue, so I encourage you to ask that question. But from the chat, I see Beth Wilson is asking a question. Do you have a sense right now of what the estimated cost for this approach is in the bill, for the bill?
The short answer is large. I don't think there's any other way that you could get America to, even by 2035 rather than 2030, 0% emissions in its electricity sector, 0% emissions in its vehicle sector, and, substantially increased zero emissions or climate smart farming by 2030 or 2035 without substantial federal investment. There's only so much that tax credits can do. Our bill would double a lot of the tax credits that are in the Green New Deal to ensure that, solar power and wind power are getting the tax treatment that they deserve to make it more profitable than entrenched industries like oil and gas. But, at the same time, with these mandates, there's no financial incentive as it is to transition to these industries without government getting involved. So it needs to be an expensive bill in order to function. I don't have the exact cost from the CBO. I know it was, and I imagine it was somewhere in the hundreds of billions, if not like 1 or 2 trillions. But I will get back to you guys on that because I know that we do have that estimate somewhere in our files. I just have to hunt it down.
Thank you so much, Robert. Carol V, I recognize you have your hand raised. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes, thanks, Pablo, and thank you, Robert, for presenting tonight. And hello, everyone. I was wondering, are there going to be some talking points somewhere that we can reference for when we go talk to our legislators?
Yes, that is a great question. And so the Earth Bill Network is the primary team that coordinates talking points for congressional visits with legislators. The point of contact for the Earth Bill Network is Todd Fernandez. He's the director of climate and crisis policy. I encourage anyone who's interested in getting involved to reach out to Todd at the email address that I will drop in the chat. I believe it's just climatecrisispolicy@gmail.com. And that is Todd Fernandez. And Todd is someone who is a dedicated climate activist who is retired now. I think he's over 65, but dedicates 100% of his time to advocacy for this bill. And he has been, a key ally in organizing meetings with congressional offices. I know he's got talking points, and I think I can probably get them from him and pass them along to Pablo so you all have them. But as far as just if you're interested in getting involved in advocacy for this bill, in addition to reaching out to me, Todd is definitely our primary activist point of contact who has been instrumental in getting the endorsements and the co-sponsors that we've gotten so far.
Thank you.
I would add here that any Unitarian Universalist who wants to begin to understand the bill can start by taking UUSJ's action on the bill. And I'll remind folks that there are plenty of UUs who are involved with the Earth Bill Network in its early phases at the very least. And I know that at least one or two of them are on this call, so if they want to make themselves known, they can do so. Beth, I recognize you, and please ask your question.
Yes, I'm involved with an organization that many UUs are. It's called Results, and we lobby Congress to end poverty. And that's our sole focus. But there's a sister organization called Citizens Climate Lobby, based on our model of training citizens to lobby Congress on issues. And in addition to being an environmental, as a poverty lobbyist, a longtime environmentalist activist. And I wonder if the Citizen Climate Lobby organization is involved with this effort, and if not, it ought to be.
Yeah, I think so. I have met in my office with my boss's office. We work in cubes, but I've met with the CCL on numerous occasions about, different climate bills. For instance, we have a bill called the Ban Oil Exports Act that CCL is supporting, which would permanently codify the current U.S. ban on oil and liquefied natural gas exports, kind of setting an example for the rest of the world. CCL is, intimately involved in that. I do think that CCL is kind of waiting to see where other larger, more power. CCL is incredibly large, powerful, but I think they're sort of waiting to see where the Sierra Clubs, the NRDCs, the WEACs land on this bill before they jump on it. But to the extent that any of you have connections at CCL and want to reflag this bill for them, we are 100% supportive of that. Any and all organizations that we can reach out to, that we can talk to, that we can potentially get involved as endorsers or as potential contributors to the Senate version of the bill. We don't want to close any doors. CCL is such an important part of the climate community. They've already endorsed one of our key pieces of climate legislation. And so, getting them on this big one is definitely an important part of it. As I mentioned, I don't want to ramble too much here, but for the Senate version of the Earth Bill, that might push the timelines back, that might edit the agriculture section just a bit. We are actively working to get comments from, I think I mentioned 3 different groups: Sierra Club, NRDC, We Act. Another one is Citizens for Biological Diversity. I think Union of Concerned Scientists USA is a 5th. I recently had a sit-down virtual meeting that lasted about an hour with them, and I think 12 total climate groups along with Todd Fernandez, where we simply just hashed it out and talked about what these different groups would need to see in the final Senate version of the Earth Bill that we would then reintroduce in the House on the 119th in order to endorse. And I really do think that it's going to require a lot of work on our end, but if we can get even just 2 of those quote unquote big green agriculture groups to endorse, then the rest will follow a bit like dominoes, because there's a lot of coalitions that they're a part of. So we're still in the process of putting in the hard work. We know that We Act for Environmental Justice has had a ton of EJ solutions for the bill. Our team is evaluating them. We're a bit split because we think that if you solve the emissions crisis, that EJ communities like our own, like Harlem, are automatically benefited by that. At the same time, I think they bring up some valid concerns about not wanting polluters to just get free handouts from the government to do as they please, and they want to see criteria that determines who gets these transition grants first, and make sure that they have clear plans so that environmental justice communities are benefited. So we think there's a lot of overlap there. There will likely be a different version of the bill that we'll have available before the end of this year for groups like UUSJ and the CCL to view. And our hope is that we can get a Sierra Club or a We Act on board with that version.
Thank you so much, Robert. We are running short on time, so these are going to be the last 2 questions. And Ria and Robert, I'm going to ask you to be succinct so that Robert has plenty of time to answer you. So first, I recognize Ria.
Yes, thanks. I noticed in checking on the bill that it's in the Agricultural Committee. That's the last place that it landed. And in order to get it out of the Agricultural Committee, you're going to need to have some sponsors or support in the Ag Committee. So do you have any support like that, or what would it take to dislodge it and get it ported out to the floor?
Yeah, so the way that the Earth Bill is right now is that it's actually, because it has the agriculture component, the taxing and spending component, and the electricity and cars component, it's in 3 different committees. If it advanced out of any of those 3 committees of jurisdiction, it would hypothetically get a floor vote. So it's not just the House Agricultural Committee, it's also the House Ways and Means Committee, which has ranking member Democrat Richard Neal. It's also the House Energy and Commerce Committee, which, if I'm not mistaken, I don't think it's Raul Grijalva is the ranking member of the House Natural Resources Committee, but I believe that that is not a committee of jurisdiction. But if you go onto House Energy and Commerce website, it will show you a list of all the Democratic and Republican members. It looks like my computer is a bit slow, but I'm heading there now. Kathy McMorris Rogers, and then Frank Pallone. So it looks like, based on the way this says, that Frank Pallone from New Jersey would be the ranking member of that committee. If anyone's in his district, we encourage him. We are more than willing to have him on the bill. I think it's really helpful to have powerful Democrats that will hopefully be committee chairs in the 119th Congress when we'd actually want to move this bill. Jan Schakowsky is a co-sponsor of the bill. She's on the House Energy and Commerce Committee. And I think we recently got a commitment from Clark's team as well. Don't think we've officially added them yet, but we should have her in the wings. And I'm looking over the House Agriculture Committee website to see if I can find, I want to try to get to other questions, so I don't want to waste too much time, but the 3 committees of jurisdiction for this bill, House Agriculture, Ways and Means, and Energy and Commerce. You can go to each of their websites and you can see whether you have a member of Congress that is on that committee, in which case reach out, try to schedule an Earth Bill meeting with them using the resources that we'll provide after this call. And, you know, if I think we have a pretty good smattering of members, at least one from each committee that I can't name off the top of my head. But what would really help would be to get some of those Democratic ranking members, the Polones of the world, on this bill in order to ensure that it has a quicker passage in the 119th Congress once Democrats, knock on wood, control the House. So, you know, go to those websites, see if any of your congressmen fall within them. Even if they don't, and you'd like to schedule an activist meeting with one of the ranking members, that's not necessarily your congressman. I know they still take meetings. Doesn't necessarily have to be with people from their district. So we are happy to work with you guys on that. And, you know, we really need any and all hands on deck to do the hard work of meeting with these congressional offices to alert them to this bill and tell them that you care and how important it is. So, but we like where we're at with Democratic support. I think getting a Republican senator on board would be the next major step. But, you know, in the interim, any and all additional co-sponsors are welcomed and encouraged.
Thank you so much, Robert. And now the final question goes to Robert Damaris.
Yes. Are you working with Climate Reality? And if not, would you like to?
That group's name doesn't ring a bell, but please do connect me with them, Robert, and I will be happy to schedule a meeting. For the most part, our office has a pretty open door policy where if you email me or if you email our scheduler to try to set up a meeting with the congressman, at the very least, you're going to get the congressman himself or someone from our team. We rarely say no. Results in some very booked calendars, as you might be able to tell from me having to cut out at 7:45. But you know, we will make the time for you. I will, if anyone's interested in ever coordinating a meeting with the congressman himself, I'm going to drop in the chat our scheduler, Andres Heredia. He is the person to go through to get a meeting with the member. And then once again, my email is robert.hogan@mail.house.gov. I, you know, try to respond to nearly all email inquiries. And if anyone wants to meet with me one-on-one or in a group, virtually, in person, I will absolutely do my best to make the time because, you know, I sound like a broken record, without groups like UUSJ supporting this bill, you know, we're not going to get to where we need to be.
Thank you so much, Robert. I appreciate your time. And I just want to remind everyone that USA has an action on this, so it's clickable. It's a great way to get started advocating for the Earth Bill. You can send it to your member of the House. It's especially important if you happen to live in the district of one of the members of the House that Robert has detailed, or you think that you can help bring on your Republican in Congress. That's especially important. And I invite you to reach out to me. I will, after Robert leaves, put my email in the chat. He has my email, but fundamentally, UUSJ is another avenue for you to engage your members of Congress. And when you do so, we can help put together your interest with the interest of other UUs in your district or your state. And together, our power is much more audible, if nothing else.
Yeah. Pablo, something that I just want to add. I know that I'm seeing that there were a lot of questions in the chat that we didn't get to. If I do have to hop off, but Pablo, if you could possibly compile those questions for me and just email them over to me at some point this evening or tomorrow, I can try to go through that and get answers to every one of them that at least I'm aware of. And for those that I'm not, like the CBO score, I'm going to reach out to try to get you answers as well.
Well, thank you so much, Robert. Yes, we will do that.
Okay.
Now, for everybody, thank you, Robert. Let's everybody give Robert a hand. Thank you, Robert. We appreciate your time.
Yeah.
For those of you who'd like to linger a little bit longer, we're going to do what we usually do here at UUSJ and have a lingering and warm goodbye. We're going to talk a little bit about what we heard Robert say and what might be some of our next steps. And I'm also
thank you so much, everyone. I do have to hop off, but you know, thank you again. We're so grateful that UUSJ has endorsed this important bill. You know, visit earthbill.org to get involved. Email me for a meeting. Pablo can connect you with me as well. And tell your neighbors, tell your friends to go visit your local congressional office or schedule a meeting to talk to them about the Earth bill, because we need all hands on deck to save our planet. Okay. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Take care. So yes, we were really pleased to get Robert. He's a very busy guy. It took a while to schedule him. For those of you who are joining us this evening, thank you so much for doing that. You know, when we get Hill staffers to join us, it's important to have a solid showing of interest that makes them more willing to make a appearance again in the future. And they tell their friends and colleagues they had a good time with UUSJ. So that's important. So I think it's important to just open some processing space, because this is a big bill. It's got three important components to it. It is a big and visionary bill. It's more of a movement bill than some of the other bills that UUSJ has endorsed. But really, if we want to be impactful on this issue, it's going to require that folks in this audience and UUs across the country make themselves known to UUSJ so that we can help schedule meetings and really showcase some of the interest in this bill. That can start with a simple conversation about have you heard about the Earth Bill? There are plenty of materials available. Most of them are through the Earth Bill Network. They've done some really great things, and I can't underscore or highlight enough. There are plenty of UUs that were involved in the process of deliberating around the Earth Bill, what it should include, how it should approach the science, how it should approach the policy, how it should go about strategically assembling the network that eventually was formally baptized as the Earth Bill Network. So we have deep investment in this bill already. And it's up to us to carry it forward if we'd like to do that. Does anybody have questions for me? I don't want to assume that I can understand your body language. I see a lot of faces, heads were doing a lot of nodding while Robert was speaking, but I also saw a lot of the questions that speak to various components. I am not an expert on all this. Robert cautioned me numerous times before he made an appearance for us that he was not an expert on all of this, but at the very least, we can advance the conversation. And no, there won't be a session at GA on this issue. If we get a favorable response from UUs during the remainder of 2024 and perhaps the early portion of 2025, then maybe next year, it might make sense to have a session at GA on this bill. But in general, my sense, I'm not an expert on GAs, but my sense is that the folks who authorize sessions at GA, they like topics that are broader than a specific bill. So if the topic is mandates and how they facilitate environment and climate justice, that might be a session that's eligible for the GA. If it's specifically talking about a bill, again, my general sense is that they're not too jazzed about that. I could be wrong, we could be proven otherwise, but that's what I would expect. That at this GA, it's virtual. They have a program that's pretty set. There will, however, be a cohort conversation that's talking about climate justice. UUSJ is part of that. And I want everybody on this call to be aware of the UU Climate Justice Revival that's being organized for September. So there's plenty of climate conversation and certainly climate justice conversation that will be happening at this GA. But this specific bill won't necessarily be part of the mix, to answer your question, Anne. Does anybody else have a question? And I actually prefer people raise their hand and speak rather than pepper me with questions in the chat. Carol, Tate, being brave. Thank you so much.
Hi, I really appreciate you putting this together. This was very informative. I work a lot with Citizens Climate Lobby, and I had not heard of this Earth bill. So this is really, really interesting to me. But we really need these talking points. And Robert suggested that we get in touch with some other guy, Todd Fernandez. That would be a great thing to for you guys or somebody to like compile and send to us.
Yeah, actually, Lavona Grow put the primary link where all of that material is available in the chat, a little earlier in the chat at about
Okay.
7:43 p.m. So Todd Fernandez has made appearances for the UUs for Just Economic Community. His talk is available. I think we have it on our YouTube webpage. You know, briefings by Todd are available. He makes the rounds quite regularly. And I'm telling you, 95% of what you guys are asking for is available at www.earthbill.org in one place or another. The real question is, how many of you want to meet your member of Congress or want to meet the environment and climate justice staff member for your member of Congress? And are you willing to collaborate with UUSJ to make such a meeting happen at some point during 2024 and certainly into early 2025? Because the one thing that Robert has said in other circumstances, but he didn't say on this call, a lot of whether or not this bill gets moved on in 2024, in 2025, and certainly in early 2025, depends on how much attention is paid to the bill now. And so to the extent that you are excited about this approach, that you think that we need to do this kind of work, that we think Congress needs to require polluters to engage in actively controlling their own emissions, and you think that this particular vehicle is a good vehicle for doing that, then we need you, the bill needs you to make yourself available for meetings with staffers. Terry Welsher, I see your hand and I recognize.
Thank you. I was trying to answer your question about would I be willing to meet with a congressman and that sort of thing. And I guess I'm also a member of Citizens Climate Lobby, so I know how they work and I'm very familiar with their bills. And one of the things that wasn't obvious to me here that I think would be helpful is what is the connection between the requirements that are stated in the bill and the incentives to try to reach those goals. In other words, the incentives are an attempt to push the economy in a certain direction. So there are organizations who can model these sorts of things. For CCL's carbon fee and dividend bill, which is well, not very much like this one, but it has the same goals. CCL has several organizations that have done the economic and climate modeling to demonstrate the connection between the proposed bill. And it really helps a lot. I think especially if you want to get into the Republican side, you need something like that. My gut reaction here is that if the connection is weak, so the modeling can also help. If there's another section version of this bill coming, it'd be interesting to have people who can think about things that way and come up with some idea of, you know, it seems to me the 50% stipends sounds arbitrary to me. So I wonder who has an idea that fits the goal.
Yeah, my sense is that there actually were a lot of statisticians and modeling experts involved in the generation of the initial STU. So again, I would encourage you to go look at that www.earthbill.org link that was provided in the chat. and poke around. There's probably a section that deals with the modeling.
Okay.
I'm, you know, I'm gonna end up being quoted, but I think it's there. I remember
Okay.
some things related to
That's-
that, but I don't have it at my fingertips.
Fair
And
enough.
I do know that they took that notion, the notion of modeling and being scientifically as specific as possible and, you know, as impactful as possible on the business side very seriously. Because as far as I recall, a lot of the people who were involved with the network and the initial thinking around the bill, they were very aware of CCL's approach, and they're very aware of the standard of sort of what the environmentalist market requires in order for buy-in to occur.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Robert, again.
Yes, thank you. It sounds as though we need more publicity. As the lady mentioned earlier, this is the first time I've heard of this bill, and I'm very impressed with what I've heard. I mentioned Climate Reality. Climate Reality is the organization Al Gore founded after his movie. And there must be over about 20,000 Americans who are now what are called climate reality coaches and trainers. And I'm one of them. I think it would be a great way to publicize the bill. And I would be happy to take upon myself the initiation of that. But every year there is another training for climate reality people involving an additional 400 adults, all interested in the climate. It seems to me that this might be a very good way to publicize this bill.
Well,
Yeah.
Robert, I encourage you to correspond with me by email.
I will.
And, you know, let's follow up on that. I don't know exactly what role USJ would play in facilitating that, but I'd certainly be supportive of your efforts and willing to be a thought partner with you on how to get that done. And if I can't help you directly myself, then I'd be happy to connect you with others that I think would be able to help you. I will
Thank you.
say this. You know, the bill will evolve. The bill is going to have a life cycle like many other bills in Congress. They start out one way and they sort of begin to move as co-sponsors are sought and as the sausage gets cooked. And he didn't sort of lean on it very heavily in his comments, but this notion that a Senate bill is going to have at least two key differences. One is going to be whether or not they change the timeline. So I don't remember who it was in the chat. Someone said, I really don't think they should change the timeline, because then you're signaling to people that it's not as urgent as it really is. Those are the kinds of things that Robert Hogan and his boss, they need to hear that now, because as they're shopping around for a potential Senate sponsor and collaborating with that person to have a bill that's reasonably aligned with what they already have in the House, those are going to be the kinds of factors that come into play. The other thing is, you know, he mentioned REACT, and he mentioned that some of the bigger environment and climate justice shops are really looking at the issue, the dynamic that this particular bill does not have a deeply obvious environmental justice component. And so as plenty of CCL people are on this call, you guys should know that that's a constant question in today's environment and climate justice in policy milieu, that our sense of what is just and what is right for the environment and for climate has been evolving, and that is always a question, and it is increasingly a question among all these staffers on Capitol Hill. How does this particular proposal relate to those procedural justice and procedural injustice questions, and what are we doing about these communities that are often referred to as sacrifice zones or sacrifice constituencies? That is a big question, and we act as one of the champions of that kind of analytical approach. But the others are also concerned about. Sierra Club is also concerned about that, and others. So that's, we might see an insertion of an environmental justice component into this bill on the Senate side. That's what I think he was trying to get us used to as an idea might happen. And that happens with bills. Almost very few bills start out exactly the way they were written the first time, and you know, multiple sessions of Congress later, they're still the same bill. There are a few, but even I can't remember.